drivers in terms of raising the floor versus raising the ceiling. I think the archetype of raising the floor on a current grid, at least right now, is Fernando Alonso.
But then with Fernando, you also get someone that is a very type A personality that can rub people the wrong way, especially teammates.
Raising the ceiling, I think my archetypal driver there, and probably no surprises here, is Lewis.
You don't be the prisoner of the moment that you are, right? I would, not that you asked me to, but at this point, I would put Max in the same conversation too, because he certainly has done that. So
I want to come back to Max.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Tired F1 Pod. We are back and more tired than ever. Shez, we are speaking not a few days removed from the Austrian Grand Prix. And I know we have a lot to talk about today, but I do want to take a brief moment as we get started today and just acknowledge our wonderful community. Our last video, Shez, you won't believe it, has gotten Lewis Hamilton fans and Max Verstappen fans all in arms against us. Like, we have defined, yes, we have unified fans from opposite fan bases in a time when nobody can agree on anything. There you go. We've achieved world peace in whatever form this looks like. Aren't you proud of us?
Yeah, man. I love that everyone hates us. It's amazing.
I love it. And the praise has been pouring in constantly. We have been accused of being experts who just woke up yesterday. We've also been accused of just not watching races at all, which then begs me to question, why are we doing this in the first place either? But hey, I love gas bagging, so there we are.
It's good. Yeah, it's only taken a few months, but we have been rumbled. Thank you. And please keep leaving those amazing comments. We do read all of them, and we do respond to as many as we can, as you've probably noticed in the comments. But I have to say, I do love the fact that we have such a cool little community. It was always the same folk that are on watching our videos and replying to them, and we absolutely love having you there. And whatever you're saying, it's all brilliant to hear.
Yeah, right. And a big shout out to the about 800 of you subscribers who decided to waste your time with us, but we really appreciate that. All right, so what do we want to talk about today, Shez?
So this week I was listening to the Races F1 podcast post the Spanish Grand Prix, and one of the questions that was posted in by one of their listeners, I don't know which one it is, was talking about drivers in terms of raising the floor versus raising the ceiling. And I found that really interesting, because I think you could definitely talk about different drivers in terms of what they bring to a team and what they bring to a particular car. So I just wanted to define terms before we had a little chat about which drivers we think might fall into which category and why.
Can't wait to get to this one.
Yeah. So the only definition I could find for this was from the NBA Reddit, and like I have to say, I don't know anything about basketball. In fact, I had to Google what NBA stood for. I'm joking. I didn't really, but
well, right. Okay. You're gonna have to do a 101 on the NBA with you at some point here.
There we go. We could do that's it, the education episode. But raising the floor is about increasing the stability of a team's offense, or providing the team with defensive communication or actual defensive output. I mean, it sounds like it's very much about shoring up the core, the foundation of your team, to have something to strike from, like to improve and solidify your base. Whereas raising the ceiling is about increasing the maximum potential of your team's offense, right? So taking what you have and and absolutely making the most of what you have, maybe even outperforming what you have, right? Oof. And I figured from an F1 point of view, drivers do kind of fall into these categories, right? Like, we have a heap of drivers that raise the floor in terms of they can take a bad car, right, and they can get anything out of it. It doesn't matter if it's got understeer and oversteer at the same time. They can still get a tune out of the car, get a decent lap time, hustle it for want of a better word. And then you have drivers that raise the ceiling, right? That when a car doesn't perform that well, also tend to not perform quite as well, maybe even not perform as well as you would expect them to perform. And yet when the car starts to come back and it starts to be objectively better, they exponentially outperform that car, even if the driver in the other car has been performing quite well in that car up until that point. And I'm sure no one's gonna no one's gonna get any prizes for guessing which drivers I'm primarily going to put into these categories. But I thought it might be interesting to see which drivers fall where for you. So I'm going to nominate one for raising the floor, because I think the archetype of raising the floor on the current grid, at least right now, is Fernando Alonso. I think that man, doesn't matter what you give him, he will absolutely nail it. He'll get the absolute most, the best out of any car that you possibly give him. Right? He's done it for years at Ferrari. He managed to spin a championship challenge out of the 2012 Ferrari, which was possibly the fourth quickest car on the grid that year. And in 2010, again, that car was not the fastest car on the grid by any means, and he still chased a title for it. And if you go back even further than that, in 2005, what was the quickest car on the grid? It was the McLaren. And yet, the way he hustled the R25 meant that Kimi had to drive the wheels off his car, literally, if you watch what happened at the Nürburgring that year, to grab a title. That for me is the archetypal, I will get anything out of any car.
Yeah.
But there's a limit to it, because I think he has, if you look back at what he's done over the course of his career, there's a suggestion that when it comes to qualifying, there's a
something
just
missing.
there's just a fraction not there. And you look, especially when you look at him up against someone like Jarno Trulli, who I think falls into the other category. Certainly on a Saturday, he was called a qualifying specialist for a reason. That when a car is delivering objectively, they can get an extra something out of it that somebody that falls into that raising the floor category can't quite get. And I think Fernando showed that against somebody like Jarno.
Yeah.
So that's why I think for me, he's the archetypal raising the floor driver. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I think Fernando's body of work in this regard speaks for itself. I love that you brought 2005. I also hate that you did, because, yeah, of course. I mean, McLaren with a little bit more reliability might have anyway, but it is what it is. I do think you're right. He dragged Ferrari through all the Ferrari years that he was out there, and really made them contenders when they really shouldn't have been, right? Or arguably shouldn't have been there. And I think the last couple of seasons at Aston, he really sort of put them on the map. I mean, I keep thinking back to last year, right? I mean, he was right there. I think at some point, if I'm correct, after the first couple of races, he might have even been second or third in the championship standings. He had sort of managed to do that. Of course, there are many factors to all of these things, but there's no surprise why he stayed at Aston Martin too, right? I mean, the fact that he is the kind of guy that they need is to really raise the floor, and their floor has been very, very low. And this year it's the same thing too. So in many ways, he's the right fit there. I couldn't argue with that anymore. The only thing I would say is this is where kind of the downside of this is, right? But he has not been able to win a whole lot since 2005, right? And I think that's sort of 2006, 2006. But that's sort of the downside of it. And you saw some of that show itself up in 2007 too, right? I mean, of course, him and Lewis were going at it that year, so that it was slightly different. But I think those limitations kind of show up when that happens. And there's also an element to the choices he's made about teams as well. So it kind of gets muddied up a little bit. So
I think most of the time, it's a good thing, right? One, it gives a team a baseline. They know that whatever they've produced, that driver is getting the most out of it. So that is the potential of that car. There isn't a lot more that you're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
So it's good as a benchmarking tool. And 9.9 times out of 10, that's going to result in a championship challenge, right? And if you don't have a driver from the other camp in your team, then actually, right, then actually you're all good. And maybe that was part of the reason that Jarno was kicked out of the team in 2005, because it just upset the apple cart a little too much.
Yep, exactly.
When Fernando was their guy. Would I argue with that? Do I think that Jarno Trulli, despite his qualifying prowess, was going to take a world championship? No, I think Fernando was going to be your best bet. So I think that was the right thing to do. And in that situation, actually prioritizing what Fernando brings, that raising the floor mentality, is sometimes the better thing to do, even if when you look at them, he wasn't the guy that was getting the most out of the car every single time. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I think the other thing to consider when we talk about Fernando is what he has meant in terms of the culture of the team, right? From an organizational culture standpoint. So whereas I don't think these two things are related, right? The fact that he can extract the most out of his cars, however good or not good they are, have anything to do with this. But then with Fernando, you also get someone that is a very type A personality that can rub people the wrong way, especially teammates. And I think there's a lot that goes into it. And it's funny, not too long ago, we were talking about, possibly Fernando being paired with Max at Red Bull, right? This is all this is a couple months ago that we were talking about this.
Yeah.
And I don't know that he would have been helpful to a team like Red Bull, which was already, their floor is not the issue. Their ceiling is so high already that there would be nothing there for him to do in terms of really being able to make it. I can't say nothing. Of course, he would bring a lot to the table, but I think that's interesting. So I feel like that to sort of circle back, right? The raising the floor type of driver is really, really important when your floor needs to be raised. Otherwise,
yeah. Like I said, I think it depends on the situation that you find yourself in, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so on the flip side of that, raising the ceiling, I think my archetypal driver there, and probably no surprises here, is Lewis, in that when the car starts to when the car is at a level where it's nowhere, he can sometimes, I think, struggle more than his teammate. It's happened sort of fairly conspicuously this season, hasn't it? Not this season, but not just this season, but across 2022 to 2024. You can see in the early part of the season where Mercedes absolutely just don't understand their car, Lewis seems to suffer more at the hands of that car than George does. Whereas as the car starts to get understood better towards the end of the season, that's happened 22, 23, and 24. And I'm hoping it's happening in 24 anyway.
Freudian slip.
Yeah. Well, it's all part of my prediction, isn't it? But as the car starts to come good, Lewis starts to ramp it up more. Like he gets even more out of that package, more out of himself than his teammate does. And you saw how that played out with qualifying performances both in 2022 and 2023. And even if you look back even further than that, I think Lewis's best season, my favorite season watching him anyway, was 2009, where that McLaren was hanging off the back of the pack, right? They were qualifying 16th, 17th in Melbourne. And he was up against Heikki Kovalainen in his final season at McLaren that year, and there wasn't that much to separate them at that point. And Heikki, he was a good driver, like he had decent pedigree and stuff, but he wasn't Lewis and he wasn't like a Fernando. And yet at the beginning of that season, before they got the double diffuser in Hungary, they were both kind of like mixing it together. But then as soon as the double diffuser turned up, Heikki got left in the dust, and Lewis just ramped it right up to the point that he won 2 races. And probably would have won in Abu Dhabi that year as well if he hadn't had a reliability issue. So for me, he's the archetypal. If there's a bit more to get out of the car, he'll get that absolute extra. That's when his magic starts to be apparent. That's when you start to see how great he is. But he needs a car that has the potential to be objectively good.
I cannot disagree with any of your logic here, and I would say by default, I would extend this title to any championship winner, right? Because if you are to win a championship, in any year, whether it's one or multiple, you have to have that kind of quality, right? To be able to take that car to that next level, to be able to do things with the car when everything else is breaking down, overcome strategic errors, overcome, the unknowns of everything that are out there. So to me, this all kind of factors into the raising the ceiling type of thing. And there's absolutely no doubt that Lewis does that. I mean, you don't become a multiple time world champion just sort of, putting it in cruise control, so to speak. I would say, though, there's a big caveat on this season. So let's wait and watch, right? Because you don't be the prisoner of the moment that you are right now, and running away don't run away to the bank with that bet. It's not going to work just yet. Well, let's wait and see, because you have on previous occasions argued that maybe Lewis is not up to speed with keeping up with George, right? And I've taken the opposite position. So let's just
all I've said is that all I've said is that he needed to work on his qualifying, and I've said that a million times.
Okay, that's fine. But he's done that since then. So it's only been one race. Let's and we still have 14 more to go. So, and what is the record, right? It's 8-2, right? So
8-2.
Yeah, there you go. So, I think you're 100% right. But look, that's what you would expect with him too. And I would, not that you asked me to, but at this point, I would put Max in the same conversation too, because he certainly has done that. So
I want to come back to Max because, I think he's in a special category at the moment. But we'll come back to we'll come back to him in a minute. Okay.
Sneak peek. Spoiler alert.
So those are my archetypes for those two categories. Who else would you put in the raising the floor category?
I would give an honorable mention to Alex Albon for the work that he has done at Williams, right? I think it's
I have that. That's a good one.
It's a pretty. I think it kind of stands for itself. His record, putting them in Q3s when they really shouldn't be anywhere close to that, in the top 10 so many times. He to me is someone that comes to my mind as that kind of guy. You know who else I would put in there too, slightly? Carlos Sainz. I think he kind of falls in that category too, where he is able to and literally raise the floor from the cockpit with strategies. Like those are of course he's doing great things with the car, right? But to me, the moments that stick out are the ones where he's overriding the strategy, which actually Ferrari drivers get that title no matter what. Like they get that. It comes in their package because they have to overcome strategic errors. So why not? Let's just do that.
Yeah.
But those two guys.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. And I think you look at what Carlos did last year when Ferrari bought their upgrade package in Spain. Charles was down there in 16th and Carlos was off getting a podium. That car wasn't ready for that, but Carlos was able to find something both in himself and in the car that allowed it to be competitive that race. And through the middle part of that season, when the car maybe wasn't absolutely at its best, but had the potential to sneak a result, it was Carlos that was sneaking that result. And Alex, I think, is also another really good example that that it's difficult really to know what the potential of that Williams is. He falls smack bang in that Fernando ballpark, doesn't he? Where you've got a driver that is probably a raising the floor driver, but you don't have necessarily a raising the ceiling benchmark next to him. And that's been the case at Williams for a few seasons now. Even when George Russell was there, you never really knew what the absolute potential of that Williams was, because you had, this outstanding driver in one car, and then you had, someone that struggled a little bit in the other car. So that raises questions a little bit, both about the car and the driver. But you can't question the fact that if there's some latent potential in that car, Alex is getting the most out of it. And there's credit to that. There's a huge amount of credit to that. And for Williams, I think it's a perfect driver. He's a perfect driver, because what you need as Williams is as you're rebuilding your team, is understand where your car is, what strengths it has, what weaknesses it has, and what you need to focus on. Alex gives you a really good benchmark of where you stand right now and what you still need to do. So he's perfect for that team.
Right.
Can I throw in a raising the ceiling driver?
Let's go.
So on the grid right now, Charles Leclerc is definitely a raising the ceiling driver.
Sure.
Again, last season seemed to bear that out. He even admitted it, right? That in the middle of the season, when the car started to understeer a bit more, that was the predominant trait in the Ferrari. Carlos was able to get more out of it, and was able to get results like the Singapore win. But then when the car balance was changed a bit, and there was a bit more rear end instability worked into the balance, Charles was able to get more out of it and was able to consistently be right at the front every single race, to the point that he was getting, he out-qualified Max 14 times last season. So there you go. That's a car that shouldn't be there. Let's not relitigate physics, but it's a car that shouldn't really be there, yet Charles is putting it there. He's outperforming what you would expect that car to be able to do. He's bringing that extra little magic when the car objectively is better. And again, that's the kind of driver that, again, you talk about in terms of, that's a future world champion, right? That's somebody that's going to win titles. And I come back to that Fernando comparison, because when Fernando was being talked up as a junior, when he was like a rookie at Minardi in 2001, the trait that he was singled out for was the fact that he was able to get that Minardi that shouldn't have been able to do anything, outqualifying VARs and Saubers. It shouldn't have been there, and that's what he was doing. He was outperforming. He was getting the most out of a rubbish car. Charles won't necessarily get the absolute most out of a rubbish car, but he will get a little bit more out of a really good car.
Agreed.
So I think he's a good example of that. And if you look back at history, there's probably a few historical drivers that would do a similar kind of thing. I think somebody like Michael was definitely a raising the ceiling kind of driver.
Mika,
of raising the ceiling kind of driver, whereas somebody like Jensen was definitely a raising the floor kind of driver, wasn't he? In certain circumstances, he could get the most out of a good car, out of a car. But when the car wasn't that great, that's kind of what I mean. But when the car wasn't that great, he'd get a tune out of it. He'd more often than not beat his teammate. But then when the car was incredible, it was still the other driver that was, if you look at his stint across his McLaren seasons, 2011 accepted, and that, we know that there were multiple reasons why Lewis wasn't performing that year. But even then, on qualifying pace, Lewis was ahead in 2011. So when the car is a bit better, Jensen isn't the guy that's going to get you the results, but he will consistently get you results in a car that isn't always brilliant, if you know what I mean.
Yep, agreed. I can't disagree with anything you say there. I'm very tempted to wait until our grand finale here, because you definitely have something there for me.
Well, because I think Max, that's where this is coming, right? This is where this is going to. Max falls into a special category where, at the moment, like right now, I think he fulfills both categories.
He does. Yeah. I mean, I would still argue he's a little bit more raising the ceiling only because Red Bull is already there, right? But I mean, if you told me that, I mean, look, in the last race, I mean, he even admitted, right, that Red Bull wasn't the fastest car in Spain. Both him and Lando acknowledged that the McLaren was faster, right? This is not me or you or anyone on the outside saying the drivers acknowledge that. And then for him to put that car and in a comfortable win, and I know it wasn't as comfortable in the end, but I mean, I don't know that you could have drawn it out much better than that, right? Given the circumstance and given the fact that they weren't the quicker car. So I would make the argument that he is, I think you're right. He's doing both at the same. I think part of this is also, right? Look at where Checo's been, right? The last 4 or 5 races. He's been nowhere, right? I think, and I think our sense of that analysis gets slightly inflated by the fact that he is blowing Checo out of the water. And oh, by the way, holding his own against 4 drivers, now maybe 6 with Mercedes in there, that can, legitimately challenge him for wins week after week. So to me, he's definitely more raising the ceiling, but I would have no doubt or no opposition in giving him both awards. He gets the crown.
Yeah, but I think we're seeing a demonstration of previous development at work right now. So my theory about driver development is that drivers, especially championship caliber drivers, really learn their craft, like how to do stuff in the years where they're not competing for a championship, where they can switch off from the challenges of having to beat a guy either in their own team or in another car and just concentrate on the nitty gritty of their driving. And in 2022 and 2023, Max was really able to do that. Like okay, Max had to fight against Charles at the beginning of 2022, but that seemed to fall away quite quickly. And then he was able to really concentrate on how do I get the most out of my tires? How do I get the most out of my strategy? How can I work out what I do over a race stint? How do I decide when to push, when to hold back? And you're seeing the fruits of that research and that practice in how he's performing right now. But specifically to this question, I think if you look back to 2023, right at the beginning, he had that eureka moment in Baku where Perez beat him over the course of that weekend, right? When the car wasn't actually as good as it could be. And I think the car then got developed a bit more over the course of the season and had a higher potential. And Max naturally was able to get more out of it. But there was a switch at that point where I think he realized that even with a car that isn't great, there are things that he can do to get the most out of it. So that even when the car isn't the absolute best on the grid, he'll be the guy in the team that gets the most out of it. He'll be the one that raises the floor, as it were, not his teammate. Because at that time, I thought it was Perez that was on that little trajectory where he was the guy that was able to raise the floor in that team. But Max has switched it so that now he can do that too. So he's there hustling the car when it needs to be hustled. And then when objectively it gets better, he just ramps it up and exponentially gets better with it as well. So that for me makes him an absolute monster. Like, how are you supposed to beat that guy?
He's now turning into invincible territory, right? And we'll wait for the season to play out, but now we can really, now with 4 titles now, we can really start to wonder how many more, right?
And I think it's not quite 4 yet, man.
Well, at the end of this year, right? We can start to. That's what I said. If things play out the way he is doing, and look, can you actually again pick against him? Even if, I mean, look, McLaren was faster than him, right? And Lando couldn't do it. Oscar was nowhere to be found. Ferrari are in a bit of a funk right now. Mercedes are just arriving to the party. So I don't know. There's so many questions. And I think, so some of this kind of aids him, not that he needed anything, right? And again, he's doing it single-handedly. He's literally carrying his team on his back. And look, if they win the constructors title, as in Red Bull does, then I think it's over. So I think you're right. Then at that point, he's literally raised the ceiling and the floor, and Christian Horner and Helmut Marko and even Adrian Newey, who's outgoing, he's raised everyone, right up there. So I think you're right. I mean, now looking at Max, and I love sort of listening to the drivers and looking at their body language, right? And if you follow the story arc of Max, right, over the years, especially in 21, there was this feistiness to it, right? This edginess, and now he's even chilling it with Lando, and even saying funny things like, "Oh, Lando needs to look in the mirror," and in the post race conference, and all these things. And you would never hear Max say any of that. I mean, he used to be one of those guys who said, "If you ask me that question again, I'm going to headbutt someone," right? That's one.
You.
Yeah,
I
headbutt
was
you or
just
whatever.
thinking that.
I was just thinking. So I
and
mean,
that,
so
and,
it's another echelon now, really.
and that's why. So a lot of the comments from the last video were, why are you saying that Max is on the edge of greatness as opposed to he is already an absolute great right now? And part of my argument for that is, first of all, I think he's in there now, right? Like the last few races and what is happening, like, has put it beyond doubt for me. He's right in there as one of the absolute top 3 or 4 all-time greats. There's no question about that. And bookmark it, take that to the bank.
Wow, we
top
should
4.
we should frame this.
But the reason for that is he's now doing the things that I talked about needing to see, right? That from a racecraft point of view, from an attitude point of view, there isn't that I need to prove myself anymore. There's just a calm. I've done this before. I know what I need to do. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And getting past the rival is no longer about I need to prove that I'm the most aggressive on the grid.
Exactly.
It's getting past the rival is now, I need to do this to make my strategy work. I need to do this right now because otherwise it's going to ruin my race because I'm thinking 20 laps into the future. That for me is a step change in how a driver approaches his craft, and for me is what all of the absolute greats do. They're not looking at the here and now. They're looking at the big picture of how a race and a season pans out. It's why he's stepped it back in battle a little bit when he doesn't need to go for it, and upped it when he does need to. The difference between him and Lewis in this regard, I think, is that Lewis, from 2016 onwards, well, 2017 onwards anyway, looked at that in a season wide perspective, right? So he'd back off a particular race because he was like, there's no point going for an absolute win when I don't need to do that. Which is something that he would have done in his earlier career. And when you speak to when you heard James Vowles on the Peak Performance podcast with Jake Humphreys, he said exactly that we had to Mercedes had to rein Lewis back a little bit and say you don't have to win every single race. And I think that was a mistake insofar as what Max now does is that he does look at he does look at the whole season, but he also looks at a race by race thing. Like, what point in a race can I back off a little bit, and what point in a race can I attack a little bit more to win every single race? I'm not saying that Lewis doesn't do that. I think when there's a race win on, he will go for it, and he will more often than not win that race. But Max looks at it on a very macro kind of on a very macro kind of, this is what I need to do to win this race kind of thing.
I think this is what, but I think this is what happens when you transition from being the hunter to the hunted, right? And then this is the natural sort of growth that happens with time, with more maturity. It's everything, right? I think it's probably true for life in general too, right? When you first start a job or a new profession or a new career, whatever it is, you're trying to prove it to yourself or to your people or to your past or whoever it is, right? And he's really kind of moved into this sort of echelon, this feeling of like, I don't really need to prove anything, right? And he says that too. And he reminds me a lot of Kimi in that regard too. It says he just really doesn't care, right? And look, there's many elements to it. You have to have the right team, the right car, a lot of those things. And the only thing I'll say is, let's see when the competition actually gets there in earnest, right? The others are just only catching up, and McLaren's only been quick for this quicker than them for a couple of races, and he's kind of fended them off. I think the only question you can ask is, can this be done over the course of the next 14 races? And if it can, I mean, then there's absolutely nothing there at all. So
yeah, agreed. So there you go. So raising the floor versus raising the ceiling. We've given you our top picks for drivers that fall into each of those categories. As usual, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a few comments. Please tell us which which drivers you can think of that fall into each category, whether you think we're right or whether we're wrong about the picks that we've put in. As usual, we'll read every single comment, we'll respond to as many as we possibly can. And I have to say, right now, loving the discussion that we're having in the comments. There's so many different points of view. It's really healthy, it's really well informed. I don't think I've read a comment section anywhere else, and we're across a whole heap of YouTube channels and Twitter accounts. I haven't seen a discussion, I think, that blends passion, knowledge, and good logic better than the comment section that we've got at the moment. So I absolutely love it, and I'm really happy that we've been able to cultivate some of that in such a short space of time. But please leave more, and we will see you hopefully in the next one.